There are a lot of challenges when it comes to homeschooling and just motherhood in general. But this one right here, the one about teaching our children how to read, it is a huge struggle. Many moms struggle with this or have concerns and feel defeated and overwhelmed and lost and like they are failing at some point. Maybe you don't feel like that with your first homeschooler, but maybe it is a subsequent child, another sibling that you feel like that. If you have a couple of children, at some point you are going to, at some point, say, I don't think I'm doing this right. I think that there's something wrong, maybe with the child, with me, the method, or something like that. Or you're just like, I just want to quit. Like, I'm just done. This is too much. Okay. Don't do that. Again, we're not quitting if you listen to Monday's episode. But let's talk about this. If you're struggling to teach your homeschool child to read, I'm going to help you right now today not to feel defeated with this amazing and awesome responsibility and privilege that you have.
Welcome to Little by Little Homeschool Podcast, where you'll learn tips and strategies that will empower you to home educate your children. I'm Leigh Nguyen, a homeschool mom of over 12 years, which includes 2 graduates. When I started homeschooling, I was pretty much on my own and was desperate for encouragement and help. My mission is to be a source of encouragement and help to you. Whether you are just beginning your homeschool journey or you're deep into the homeschool lifestyle, Little by Little Homeschool wants to help you stay the course because all the time you are investing into your children is completely worth it. If you're ready to take your homeschool to new levels, keep listening.
Let's start off here, and I'm just going to cut to the chase. Guess what? Your child that is struggling how to read and you are feeling overwhelmed and like this isn't going to happen, guess what? Someday, when they move out of your home, they aren't going to move out of your home unable to read. I know that might not help very much with whatever it is. Sometimes we hear like, it's okay. They won't still be drinking from a sippy cup, or they still won't be in diapers when they head off to college or move out of the house. I know that's a cliche thing to say, but just having that perspective, and it can be really hard when you are deep in the trenches like you are right now. So I know that might not help, but that's what today's episode is all about beyond that. So for me and my family, I have 3 children, and I have experienced, we'll say, all 3 of the categories when it comes to children and reading. And I have felt defeated. I have struggled because it just felt like such a daunting thing. I had an early reader. I had a, we'll say, in air quotes, on time reader. And I also had a, again, in air quotes, late reader. So I have seen it all. I have experienced it all. I have experienced the joy. I have experienced the struggle. And most of us have because we want the best for our children. And that is why this can feel so hard. So I have a handful of key points and things that I want to really hit on here today for you to encourage you in this area. The first thing is don't take your child's struggle with reading personally. Don't think, oh, I'm a terrible mom, a terrible homeschool mom. I'm never going to be able to teach him how to read. Don't let it affect your mood in general, overall, how you operate. Don't put aside happy and joyful things because you're just feeling so overwhelmed, downtrodden, and just exasperated with this that's going on right now. Is right now it's a hard season maybe, and you're struggling with this. We're going to talk about what to do, but just don't take it personally. Don't take their issue, their maybe an inability to grasp it in the way that you are presenting it as something that you have to take on personally. And I know that is easier said than done. We as moms really feel so deeply for our kids if we were to see them maybe rejected at the playground, someone doesn't want to play with them. We just feel it so deeply because we have just such a deep connection and such a deep love, a love we would give our life for our children. And so it's really easy for us to take it personally, like it's something that you are doing wrong and it's all your fault that maybe they're struggling and you're struggling and it just isn't catching on. There's probably an actual solution to it. And taking it personally and adding on the guilt and all the emotions isn't going to help. The second thing I want to mention is do not compare your child to any of their siblings, whether they're older or younger, or any other child. You could have a firstborn that catches on really easily, doesn't take much effort at all, and they catch on to the reading. And then your secondborn struggles and they're still struggling and it's taking some time. And then you have a third and they actually begin to read before their older sibling, that your secondborn. Don't compare them. I know it's easy because you feel like you have this experiment right in front of you. You have these three kids and you can watch, well, this one caught on this and this and this. Remember that they are all individual. God created them individually, and they're going to learn to read individually and on their own time frame. So don't compare them to another child. Don't compare them. You might be like, oh, I don't compare them verbally. I don't say to them, why can't you be like your bigger sibling and actually catch on to this? I don't do that. But maybe you're comparing them in your mind and then that comes out, or it could just be deep in you and you don't say anything, but just that negativity is something that can come out. So don't compare them. You are looking at each individual child. And this is the beauty, and it's also the struggle of homeschooling, is that we have each unique children and we get to create, customize education program for every single one of them. So just look at that child that's struggling to read. Don't compare them to their siblings. Just like we respect their unique growth curve, just like with every kid, their height and their weight, you might have a child that is just a little bit more slight, that's just smaller. And guess what? They grow up and they're a smaller human. You might have another child that is big and bulky. And guess what? They grow up to be bigger human being. And that's okay. Just like we say, oh, every single child is slightly different. They can have a different growth curve. So if you're measuring their growth from the time they're born up until they're a couple years old and say, oh, this one has a huge, they're always in the 90 percentile. And there's one you have a child that is always in maybe the 30 percentile. I'm not saying the 30 percentile is unhealthy or 90 percentile is unhealthy. I've had kids in both of those ranges. I've had kids over and off the charts. And guess what? They all even out. So just like we respect that their bodies are going to be a little bit unique, let's respect their unique journey to coming to the point where they are able to read. Fourth thing I want to mention is that your stress is felt by your child. You, as the homeschool mom, you got to chill out. The stress that you bring to that reading lesson, the stress that you bring to wherever you're doing your homeschool or when you're approaching it or when you're saying, I don't really think you're catching on this reading. What's your problem? And even if you do it in a nice way, like, hey, little Johnny, let's sit here and do our reading lesson, they can feel it. So we as the homeschool moms, we need to chill out a little bit because they can feel that stress. And we'll get into the curriculum and that kind of stuff here in just a moment and the way to approach things. But when you come to the table to do that, or when it comes to any type of reading, and you're like, hey, why don't you try reading the read aloud? And they don't want to, they can feel that stress. Just let it go. Now, what about the curriculum? And what about the process? And what about all the steps? And how do you actually teach a child to read? Now, I am no reading specialist. I won't even pretend that I am. I have heard things from all different sources. And I've heard opposite things from one source than from another source. And to be honest, I've had a lot of reading specialists reach out and want to come onto the podcast, and I feel unsure of where I land with things. And most of them are just way too, I don't want to say methodical, that might not be the word, but they're just so deeply entrenched in their method of reading, of learning how to read, is really closely tied to the public school system. And so those are the ones that I'm typically like, I don't think you're a good fit. And so I don't have them on because I don't necessarily want to endorse that. I'm not saying that that is wrong. I've listened to a lot of different things and read different things, and it really is fascinating to me. But overall, keep it simple. If you have a curriculum, don't just jump from one curriculum to another curriculum saying, oh, well, that must be the problem. It must be this curriculum that is wrong. Do your research. Again, I don't endorse any type of specific curriculum. I have tried some different things. I have experience with different ones. And again, it's your unique child, and we can get so caught up in the science of it that we miss the child that is in front of us. But I am a huge advocate of phonics. I had two kids that went to school and read by sight words. They're okay. as far as I know. They have done fine, but that is not the way that I would endorse it. Maybe you want to do sight words, that's fine, but I would say do some research. And so I highly advocate for something with phonics so that kids can then sound out things as they get older and you meet some more complex words. And it really just helps it's using from my understanding, the correct side of the brain for interpreting that. But keep it simple. Just don't jump from curriculum to curriculum. Maybe you need to slow down with what you're using. Or maybe you need to just put it aside for a little bit. If your child is crying when it comes to your reading lessons, that's a sure sign you need to put it aside. For remember I said earlier, my quote unquote a late reader, I had to put it aside. It sounded crazy for me to be like, okay, we're not going to work on reading for a couple of years. And I just had to trust. I had some friends that I consulted and talked to, and I did a lot of praying. And I was like, I just need to put this aside. And guess what? That child can read and can read absolutely fine. And so we need to understand that some kids are going to read really well, maybe at the age of 5, and some might not read really well until they're 12. But guess what? When they're 18, they're all going to be reading. And I've actually read statistically that the children that begin to read later they'll catch up to those that began to read earlier and then surpass them. Now, again, we have unique children. You might have a 4 or 5-year-old that is really inclined to learning how to read and you barely do anything. And that's just the way that their mind is hardwired. You might have a child that's not the way their brain is hardwired and they don't really start grasping and things don't start clicking until 10 or so. That's okay too. That's the way that God has wired them. And I promise and assure you that they will be okay. However, if at any time you suspect that maybe there is a reading more than just a delay, you have a concern, I would highly recommend having your child evaluated. Now, this is the process that I would suggest going through. Find somebody that, if possible, I'm sure you probably know somebody in your church that might be a reading specialist or somebody that does reading evaluations. This would be the best case scenario. Somebody that your child knows and is familiar with this adult. You talk to this adult without your child around and you explain some of your concerns. You set up a time to go over to their house or meet at the library or they come to your house, whatever it is. And I highly recommend that you pay them for their services. They have an expertise. Unless you're doing some type of barter or something like that, please don't be rude. Please pay them for their services. Ask them what their fee is for that amount of time so that that's all out in the air. Because sometimes with friends, you're kind of like, do I tell them that this is what my fee is? But if you are the person that is like contracting with them, ask them, hey, I have this concern. Is this something that you could help me with? And if so, what is your fee for a consultation? Just clear the air right there. And they'll tell you, you pay them, and all is good. So if it is somebody that your child knows, you can simply just say, hey, we're getting together with Mrs. Smith. And it's because, Mom, I am really struggling with what curriculum to get you. I've looked at all kinds of ones and I'm not really sure. And she knows so much curriculum. And so she's going to ask you some questions, have you look at some things, maybe read some things, and then she's going to let me know what she thinks is the best curriculum to get you. And then make sure that this person that is doing the evaluation knows that as well, knows that that's kind of what you're going into it. Now, some kids won't care, but some kids will be so sensitive and it might skew the results of the evaluation. And then you get the reading evaluation and you know which direction to take at that point. You know what you're looking at. So if you have some concerns, but know that sometimes it's just the child isn't ready to read, and that's okay. We just have the school pressure. If a child doesn't leave kindergarten with reading proficiently, then they risk maybe being held back to kindergarten again, or a lot of times they just push them through to first grade, and then that child is then put into the lower reading class. That was me. I couldn't really read. It took me years to be able to catch on, and I was always in the lowest level, and it always made me feel insecure, and I just felt like I was less than. And suddenly it clicked, and I love to read now. So that is my recommendation for that. Now, again, I don't endorse or I don't promote any one curriculum. I have tried most of them, like most of the OG, like most of the old homeschool stuff I have. If anything has come out maybe in the past couple years, I might not, because a lot of the stuff that comes out that's new now is geared towards elementary age. And so I haven't used those, but a lot of the older ones I have. But if you maybe would like to look at a different point of view when it comes to reading and maybe have your mind blown a little bit, or at least be curious as to something else. And I'm going to tell you right now, some cognitive dissonance might come into play and you might get upset, you might not like it, but I think that we really need to see another side of the story when it comes to reading. And I want to recommend to you that you read the book called Crimes of the Educators. It's by Samuel Blumfeld, I think, and Alex Newman. Amazing book. At least the first part of it is going to talk about this and some issues that they see with certain reading methods or teaching how to child how to read with in a certain method. I just thought that it was a very unique perspective on the topic, and I think that it's something that should be known and should be talked about, especially among homeschoolers. And if you appreciate my kind of maybe unique or my look and outlook and my way of approaching homeschool, you're going to like your Homeschool Blueprint, which is my program that walks you through establishing your homeschool or re-establishing your homeschool. And we can talk about curriculum and we can just really get into what are those goals that I give you a lot of perspective of how to approach these things. So you can find that at littlebylittlehomeschool.com/blueprint, as well as the link is in the show notes. But if you are feeling defeated, you want to give up, we just talked last episode about quitting. Don't quit. Maybe you have to, we'll say in air quotes, quit reading for a little bit. Maybe you need to put that curriculum aside and just read to your child. Let them experience the world, play in the world, and you just need to take a different approach to it. This can be hard sometimes, especially with, we'll say, older kids. When, for example, your child is in Sunday school at church and they are in, say, second grade, and they're not quite able to read, and especially not able to read out loud. But all the other kids in the class are at public school, and they all have been forced to read. They have to read by a certain point. And so they all can read out loud, and you're afraid your child's going to be called upon. It's a true story. Ask the Sunday school teacher, just pull them aside and say, look, I'm going to request that you don't ask my child to read out loud. You can ask them all kinds of questions, but I would appreciate it if you just wouldn't ask them to read out loud in front of the group because they might not be able to. And that could crush their spirit. And we're looking for, at this point, your spirit not to be crushed. We're looking for their spirit not to be crushed. And we're looking for the two of you at some point coming together. And true story again, with all of this advice and everything, I actually had to take a major step back and I just had to trust the process. I had to let it go. I had to be everything else I could to my, we'll say, later reader. And the day that I walked in and saw that child reading a book in their room on their own accord, I promptly had to turn around, go somewhere where I could not be heard, and I bawled my eyes out because I realized that by being faithful to just taking it easy, trusting the process, trusting my child, trusting that God had equipped them to be able to do this, that it actually did work. So I want to encourage you also that you might need to take a step back, and that's okay. You might need to reroute on things. You might need to do things differently. You might have a child that's not reading well and they are in third, fourth grade, and you might have to do a lot of their reading to them when it comes to their curriculum. That's okay. I promise and assure you that it will not last forever. Your child will read. But also think of this. There are many adults who are not readers. Now that we have audiobooks, I feel like less people they'll say they're readers. But for example, my husband, if you were to find him sitting and reading a book, I would be like, okay, what's going on? That is extremely, extremely rare. He'll listen to audiobooks. I'm the one that you'll find somewhere, sitting somewhere, reading a book. And that's okay. I love and enjoy books. I love to collect and buy books. I have way too many on my shelf that I have on my to read list. But he doesn't not a big reader. Maybe you're not a big reader. And so we just think that our child has to be a big reader, but they're unique. And it's going to be okay. I promise and assure you it's going to be okay. And I'd love to be able to encourage you over in your homeschool blueprint. But in the meantime, I got to run because guess what? In just 2 days from right now is the first Little by Little Homeschool Conference. And I am not waist deep, not neck deep, maybe over my head, not really. Probably just waist deep in all the final details and preparation. So tomorrow we do all the setup, and Saturday is actually the conference. And I am so looking forward to it. This has been a labor of love, and I've absolutely loved it. I cannot wait to see the moms who are going to be there in attendance. And spoiler alert, if you can't make it this year, maybe I'll see you next year, Lord willing. So stay tuned for those details, but you have a really great day and a fantastic weekend.
Thank you for listening, friend. I'd love to connect with you more. You can find social media links in the show notes and share this episode with a friend who could use a boost to her homeschool. See you back here real soon.